I don't know about you, but these days I am feeling anxious all the time. Anxious about getting COVID, anxious about my friends and family or church members getting sick, anxious about the health of people that I know have the virus already, anxious about my daughter's health and my daughter's education, anxious about the upcoming election, anxious about the future of our democracy, anxious about everybody who's isolated from their loved ones in this pandemic, anxious about our city, anxious about our church. All of my anxieties tend to roll together into one great giant ball of stress, and it can be overwhelming at times. But I have a friend who watches the birds, and I've discovered he isn't as anxious as I am about tomorrow. A few days ago, this friend who watches the birds invited me to a tailgate party. But it wasn't for a football game, it was a tailgate to watch the chimney swifts. Chimney swifts, for those who don't know, are dark gray birds that nimbly maneuver over rooftops and fields and rivers to catch insects. They fly rapidly, with nearly constant flapping of their wings, and often twist from side to side, banking erratically. Their tiny bodies, curving wings, and stiff, shallow wing beats give them a flight style that is as unique and as distinctive as their fluid, high, and chattering call. They are among the fastest flyers of the world and have been seen in heights up to 7,000 feet, spending all of their daylight hours on the wing and coming down to rest only at night. Chimney swifts do everything on the wing. They eat, they drink, they bathe, they even snap off twigs and build their nests while they are in the air. They are almost always flying. The chimney swift was named after its habit of nesting inside chimneys. However, before European settlers invaded North America, chimney swifts rested in hollow trees. Taking over chimneys and getting their name was the way they adapted to colonization and urbanization that displaced them from their traditional dwelling place. Chimney swifts are resilient and resourceful birds, and I think that's because they are so communal and are seldom, if ever, alone. They hunt for insects in groups of 2 or 3. They migrate in flocks of up to 20. And when the breeding season is over, they hibernate together in huge communal roosts of hundreds or thousands. Chimney swifts are congregational birds. They live together and care for each other in a beautiful way. I didn't go with my friend, though, because I was too busy with my own anxieties. Jesus warned me about the danger of allowing my anxiety to get the better of me when he said, "Don't worry about your life, what you will eat or what you will drink. Is not your life more than food? Consider the birds of the air," he said. "They neither sow nor reap nor gather into barns, and yet God feeds them. Are you not of more value than they?" I didn't listen when I had the chance to take my anxieties to the birds. I should have gone tailgating with my friend to consider the chimney swifts. Jesus was right. Sitting at home with all my anxieties did not add a single second to my life. We could learn a lot by taking the time to consider the birds. Like, for instance, the fact that birds don't have to do all the work that humans do to get food and survive. They neither sow nor reap nor gather in barns, and yet they somehow always have enough to eat. Jesus said God feeds them, but we know that means they were created by God with the ability to feed each other and to feed themselves. Humans have a lot in common with birds. We're fragile creatures like birds who try to live in communities that are plagued by viruses from time to time. Remember bird flu back in 2005? But there's also a lot of differences between us and birds. Have you ever stopped to wonder, why are there no poor birds? There's so many different classifications of birds, but there are no upper, middle, or lower class birds. There are no bird ghettos or bird housing projects or bird suburbs. There are no rich birds either. There are no bird nonprofit organizations whose mission is to raise money for the care and feeding of birds, because there are no hungry birds. There are just birds. Beautiful, majestic, marvelous birds. Even in large communities of chimney swifts, somehow there's always enough food to go around. Hunger seems to be a uniquely human economic problem, a problem whose very existence in our world today challenges our ability to celebrate World Communion Sunday. World Communion Sunday began in the 1930s during the rise of fascism in Europe as a way for Christians in different countries around the world to transcend the toxic ideology of nationalism by examining their solidarity as fellow members of the body of Christ, to remind each other that we are interconnected by spiritual bonds that transcend all the boundaries that we build walls and go to war to maintain. It was the Presbyterians who came up with this liturgical event in which the church could come together every year to remember that water is thicker than blood. And our responsibility to one another as people of faith is supposed to be stronger than the bonds that we have to our familial and tribal and national and ethnic and racial allegiances. It's hard to imagine communion, though, in the midst of a global pandemic. Yet if there is one thing that this plague has taught us, it's that we are intimately interconnected in an ecological web that unites animals with humans, and humans on one side of the globe with humans on the other. Dr. King spoke of the interconnected, interrelated structure of our reality when he said, in a very real sense, all life is interrelated. All people are caught in an inescapable network of mutuality, tied in a single garment of destiny. Whatever affects one directly affects the other indirectly. Not only are people of faith cosmically and spiritually connected to each other across space and time, we are communal beings, and our creatureliness and our humanity transcend all our other identities and unite us despite all the ways that we choose to define and divide ourselves. As the saying goes, we're all in this together, right? At the beginning of the outbreak of COVID-19, many leaders were claiming our common humanity by saying, we're all in the same storm. Governments all over the world advised extreme measures to contain the virus from spreading further by making a clarion call for people to stay in their homes. However, that call did not come without its own set of challenges. Home is not a safe place for everyone. And in the hope of shedding light on various ways that people are being affected by the lockdown, an author named Damien Barr released a sensational poem on Twitter that resonated with thousands of people. He wrote, "I heard we are in the same boat, but it's not that. We are in the same storm, but not in the same boat. Your ship can be shipwrecked and mine might not be, or vice versa. For some, quarantine is optimal, a moment of reflection or reconnection, easy in flip-flops or with a whiskey and a tea. For others, this is a desperate crisis. For others, it is facing loneliness. For some, peace, rest time, vacation, introversion, yet for others, torture. How am I going to pay my bills?" Some were concerned about what brand of chocolate they would have for Easter. Others were concerned about bread for the weekend or if the noodles would last a few more days. Some were in their home office. Others were looking through the trash to survive. Some want to go back to work because they are running out of money. Others want to kill those who are breaking the quarantine. Some need to break the quarantine, though, to stand in line at banks. Others to escape. Others criticize the government for the lines. Some have experienced the near death of virus. Some have already lost someone from it, and some believe that they are infallible and will be blown away if or when this hits someone they know. Some have faith in God and expect miracles during 2020. Others say the worst is yet to come. So, friends, we are not in the same boat. We are going through a time when our perceptions and needs are completely different, and each one will emerge in their own way from that storm. It's very important to see beyond what is seen at first glance, not just looking, but more than looking, seeing beyond political party, beyond the biases, beyond the nose on your face. Do not judge the good life of the other. Do not condemn the bad life of the other. Don't be a judge. Let us not judge the one who lacks as well as the one who exceeds them. We are not all in the same boat. Some are on super yachts. Some have just one oar. We are all in the same storm, but we are on different ships looking to survive. So let everyone navigate their route with respect and empathy and responsibility. This extraordinary poem held two truths together at the same time in dynamic tension. We are all in the same storm, but we are not in the same boat. Paul was trying to communicate a similar message to the well-to-do followers of Jesus in the city of Corinth. Divisions had arisen in the Corinthian church, but they were not divisions about the preaching or the style of music or the policies or the procedures of the church. Instead, the people of Corinth were divided into factions that Paul literally called the haves and the have-nots. They were suffering with class divisions that were most evident during their celebration of the Lord's Supper. When the Gentiles were first included in the early church, they often brought a lot of Rome in with them, including Roman hierarchy and class systems of social stratification. The Roman Empire was heavily stratified as a society of higher and lower classes, peasant and noble, citizen and non-citizen, Greek and Jew, man and woman, and the stratification of these people was most visible when they came together to eat. Studies of the private and the cultic meals in the Roman Empire show us that higher status individuals expected to be seated in seats of honor at the table and to have larger portions and better food than lower status people who might be present. It was considered natural at the time for guests to occupy places at the table according to their status as decided by the host of the meal. And many ancient writers mention that guests were often served different portions and different quality of food and wine. The host's most honored guests would sit near them and receive the best food and wine. Clients and perhaps lower classes would occupy positions of descending status and received portions of lesser quality and quantity. This practice of discrimination was so expected that writers in antiquity often commented when it was absent, expressing shock and surprise that a particular host would not take care to distinguish among their guests. Maybe you'll remember Jesus' stories in the gospel. These same Roman cultural stratifications had now come to dictate the conduct of Gentiles at the Lord's Supper in Corinth. At the time, communion was a common daily meal, where the words of institution over the bread were said at the beginning of a regular meal and the cup was passed at the end. It was not just a sacrament or an ordinance or a practice, but a true daily meal, an embodiment of real economic sharing between people. And for some in the community, it was the only meal they'd have each day provided for them at their community of worship. And if there wasn't enough, then they wouldn't eat at all. Under the influence of their Roman customs, the Corinthians had split the congregation into the haves and have-nots, and the wealthy were being served first and receiving bigger and better portions of food. Lower status Christians and have-nots were not only differentiated but humiliated and going hungry. The church in Corinth, these Christians were all seated at the same table, but they were eating a different meal. Same table, different meal. The haves were showing no respect for the have-nots, and Paul argued that that meant that they were showing no respect for God or Jesus or the community. So Paul questioned the Corinthians. He said, "Do you despise the church of God and hold the have-nots in contempt? What do you expect me to say to you? Shall I congratulate you in this? I certainly will not. Paul would not congratulate their partiality, their discrimination, their class division, their neglect of the poorer members. It was their contempt for the community and the idea of equality that Paul described as the true misery in the Corinthian celebration of the Lord's Supper. The scholar Gerhard Lofink claims that the problem in Corinth was sacramental individualism. People believed that communion was about receiving salvation for themselves as an individual, independent of the community. This was a monstrous heresy and a violation of Christian unity. Class division had created a disease in the body of Christ, a collective sickness that was manifesting itself in the sickness of individuals. And as Isabel Wilkerson teaches us, caste systems have the power to create their own kind of plague on all our houses. There's a new show out right now called Utopia that's about a group of young adults who meet online and somehow get a hold of an underground graphic novel which makes them the target of a shadowy deep state organization and burdens them with the dangerous task of having to save the world in the midst of a global pandemic. Yeah, you heard me right, a global pandemic. Sound familiar? The villain in the series is named Mr. Rabbit. He's played by John Cusack. And he has this question that he asks over and over again through the first season to his children at the dinner table and also to his violent gang of followers who are wreaking havoc in the world. He says this question: what have you done today to earn your place in this crowded world? What have you done today to earn your place in this crowded world? What a question. At first, it sounds like a legitimate question about our responsibility to do something good each day, but there's a subtle evil implicit in Mr. Rabbit's question. We don't have to earn our place in this world. We belong here. As people of faith, we believe all people are created in the image of God and are beloved children of God, in whom God is pleased no matter what. We don't believe people have to earn their place in this world. We believe in the dignity and sacred worth of all human beings, regardless of what they can or cannot earn. The have-nots and the chimney swifts are just as valuable to God as everybody else, even if they never earn a dime. Earn is an interesting word, isn't it? It's an economic word. It's a word that makes me wonder why we determine a person's value in our society today based on what they earn. Due to the Chetty study a few years ago, a study of inequality revealed that Charlotte is 50 out of 50 in the nation for upward mobility. We know now, as we have always known, there are people in our community who do not have the same opportunities to earn. The Charlotteans whose lives are impacted by economic disparity remind us that we may all be at the same table, but we are eating a different meal. Yet look at how our church has stepped up this summer to provide for hungry people in Enderley Park. We fed over 30 families for 4 months during a pandemic. And look at how our church stepped up to take care of 26 Queens students who were in need of assistance and groceries. We put out the call for help, and all the students were adopted by families in our church in less than 3 hours. We had people begging for ways that they can help. That's just who we are as a church. Our responsiveness reveals that generosity is often the antidote to our individual and collective anxieties. Our extraordinary generosity levels our anxiety out and turns it for a holy purpose. We know that creating a community where there is economic equality is an essential task of the church in the world. and we can point our anxiety in that direction if we so choose. Even if we are open to all, even if we are welcome to all people, even if all people are included in our church and in our society, even if all people are at the same table, if they are eating a different meal, then our work as followers of Jesus is not done yet. The demand for equality at our communion table is a metaphor for what we strive to see in the world, a beloved community where there are no poor or hungry people. Dr. Virgil Woods, a Baptist minister and civil rights activist, likes to say, "There can be no beloved community without beloved economy." The haves are not simply called to share their resources so the have-nots will have more. The haves and the have-nots are called to remember their common humanity and their solidarity and to work together to build communities of economic equality and a world where the parameters are in place that ensure that there are no haves or have-nots, no poor or hungry people. Paul taught that the first step toward building this beloved community is that whenever we come together to eat, to remember, to take the time to examine ourselves, to wait for one another, to have the same meal, to pledge every time that we break the bread at home or at church to do whatever we can to ensure that we're not just all at the same table, but we're eating the same meal, to take time to bring our anxieties to the table and to give them to God so they might be redirected for a holy purpose. As for me, I'm going to take some more time to consider the chimney swifts of the air, how they neither sow nor reap nor gather in barns, and yet God feeds them and cares for them. And remember that every single human being on earth is more valuable than they, no matter what they earn. Maybe if I watch the chimney swifts long enough, they'll show me how to live with less anxiety. Or maybe they'll teach us how to live together in a more equitable community. Or maybe, just maybe, they'll lead us further down the road toward that alternative economy that is God's dream for our church and our world. Amen.